Hey, what's up, everyone? Sorry, moved away from the mic. Hi, what's up, everyone? How's everyone doing?
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Doing good.
Sweet. Thank you guys for joining us on another episode of Let's Have a Seance. We are episode 6. My name's Fern.
I'm Ruben.
And I'm Chelsea.
Today, we're going to be discussing some spooky stories, some historical information, and just kind of generally going over some cool cryptids that we're interested in.
Spooky.
Yeah, so we all kind of enjoy spooky stories of things that go bump in the night. And we thought it would be fun to bring forward some that we personally are interested in. So, would anybody like to go first?
Not all at once. I'll go first.
Okay.
So, mine, I'm not really sure if it's considered a cryptid. I looked it up and they said it would be,
Hmm.
but they're known as the black-eyed children.
Okay.
Some people, like demonologists, think they're demons, but once you hear the stories, they sound more like something like vampires, but
Okay.
sometimes they sound like aliens. So it's a little bit weird.
That's interesting.
But the first case that made him like popular was from a guy named Brian Bethel, out of Abilene, Texas, actually. And so with him, it's a little weird because he's actually a journalist for their news there. And the story is that he went. I think he was driving down somewhere by their local theater in Abilene, Texas, and he ended up stopping at a red light. And the red light, for some reason, was taking a lot longer. You know how when you're driving at night and it just takes forever and stuff. So that's what was happening. And then he was looking down. I'm not even sure. I'm pretty sure it wasn't his phone because it was like in the 90s or something.
Yeah, of course.
But he was looking down at something, and then he hears a tap on the glass of his car window. So he looks up, and he sees these. I think it's two children. They both have their heads down, and they're wearing hoods.
I'm leaving
So
already.
he thinks that he's actually going to get mugged or
Mhm.
something like that. So he doesn't want to roll his window down, but he notices that one of them is like really small. So he ends up saying, "Okay, well, he thinks to himself, okay, well, at least they're two kids. Like, what are they gonna
What are
do?"
they going to do to you?
So he cracks the window a little bit, and the older kid says, "Hey, can you give us a ride?" But like in a really monotone kind of way.
Hmm.
And he says, "Well, where are you going off to?" He's like, and the kid says, "Just let us in." And he's like, "Okay, well, where were y'all coming from?" "The theater. We were trying to watch a movie. We just need to go back to our house to get our money because he left his money at home, and we just need to come back." Again, he still
Uh-huh.
thinks that the answers are kind of weird.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
then he still like just stays looking at them, but the whole time the kids, while they're talking to him, they have their heads down. So then um one of the kids tells him, "Hey, well, what's the worst that can happen? We're just kids." And he
Mhm.
thinks that's such a weird, like, sus answer. So then he says, "No, I'm sorry. I can't give you a ride or anything like that, but I hope you find your way home or just be careful out there."
Mhm.
Then they both, like, looked up at the same time and they said, "No, you don't understand. You have to let us in." And that's when he noticed that their eyes were not just black. It was kind of like it just had, like, deep black holes. It,
Yeah.
it was weird. So then,
Terrifying.
uh, as the kid, like, he notices the kid's eyes, the kid is starting to kind of like persuade him to let him in.
Mhm.
But Brian notices that when he's talking to them, he starts feeling like he's in a trance, like he actually wants to let them in.
Oh.
And then finally, he kind of like snaps out of the trance and he just like takes off and books it. And then that's the first story of where people started getting familiar with the black eyed kids.
That's crazy. And that wasn't until the 90s, you said?
Yeah, it was
Man,
like
that's
somewhere in the
crazy.
1990s. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Um, one of the things that's crazy is like I was reading other stories is that majority of the time people when they see these kids they describe them as looking like they're not of this era. They're usually dressed in like old timey clothes and things like that. And every time like when they talk to them, they first have their heads down and then they reveal their eyes. And then once they you look into their eyes, somehow you become like in a trance. But every time they try to like either get in your car or your home, they always tell you they always need like permission to get in
So
your
it's like a
house.
vampire.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like they can kind of trance you, but they can't do anything until you welcome them into.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um another I have another story
Hmm.
that I have that it was a little weird cuz like I've heard it before, but I didn't know like other shit happened besides all that stuff.
Hmm.
And so one of those stories it goes pretty much like this. It's in the snowy town within the middle of nowhere in Vermont. An elderly couple heard the sound of three loud knocks at their door. They opened the door and saw two children, a boy and a girl. Parents will be here soon. May we come in? The children did not make eye contact and just stood there in the doorway. The elderly couple was hesitant, but after a while, they let the boy and girl inside. The kids settled on the couch while the wife made some hot cocoa and the husband asked them questions that went unanswered. The wife returned and noticed that her cat was scared and angry with the children. May we please use the restroom? The wife the wife looked at the kids and she finally saw them. The children's eyes were as black as starless universe. She directed them to the bathroom and returned to her husband and was covering his face with his hand. Did you see their eyes? The husband then showed his hand full of blood from a nosebleed. The power suddenly went out and the house turned as black as the kid's eyes. The wife headed to the restroom and was confronted by the voice of the kids at the end of the hall, uttering, "Our parents are here." The kids then exited the house, leaving the door wide open. The wife then noticed that there were two men at the end of the driveway. The men were very tall and slender. The wife waved but did not receive the same friendly gesture. The two men and children then drove away together in whatever car. The power then came back on a little later after the kids left. Throughout the next week, weird things happened in the house. Three out of the four cats went missing, and the fourth had been found dead in the pool of its own blood. The husband continued to have nosebleeds and finally went to the doctor, where he was diagnosed with very aggressive skin cancer.
Oh,
But so yeah, that's the end of the story. But
dang.
a lot of shit happened after like
That's crazy. And
yeah.
when was that one?
Sorry?
What did it say when that one took place?
No,
Dang.
just it's in Vermont.
Oh, okay. Man. So that's what goes on in like the middle of the US.
Yeah.
You got spooky stuff and just like random stuff of all occurrences.
So Abilene, Texas too. Don't go anywhere.
Don't go to Abilene, which is I think just good advice.
I wouldn't even go there to begin with. That sounds like Trump country over there.
We've got a couple people in chat tonight. Uh,
Woo!
Thanks Matthew and Mum Lure for popping in the chat tonight.
Hell yeah.
Hope you guys are having a good time. So, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'll go next.
Ooh,
I am going to talk about the Loch Ness Monster.
nice.
Hell yeah.
I thought the Loch Ness Monster was particularly interesting because the well, for one, how many sightings there have been, like over s- so many years.
Yeah. I feel like I've heard about it since I was a kid, like of tales as old as time of like people
Yeah,
seeing it.
basically.
And I remember when I was a kid, um, like the big thing was like those. black and white photos of
Yeah.
like, and it's like all really blurry, but it kind of looks like this giant thing. But yeah,
Yeah. Uh, but yeah, so it reached worldwide notoriety in the like 1933,
hmm
and that's when it really like blew up. But so basically, the Loch Ness monster or Nessie is a creature from Scottish folklore that supposedly lives in Loch Ness in the Scottish Highlands. Uh, the loch, which is what they call a pond.
hmm
Uh,
in the Scottish.
yeah, in Scotland. It dates back to the end of the last ice age
Oh,
and was frozen for about 20,000 years. And it also extends 23 miles, and its deepest point is 755 feet.
that's crazy.
Yeah, really scary. Should have gave a thalassophobia warning. But yeah, uh, so I originally wanted to talk about this one because I had seen that there was possibly a sighting of the same Nessie as early as the 6th century
hmm
AD, which is crazy. Um, it the story is in a book uh, called Life of Saint Columba. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but um, and it's by this guy Adamnan. Probably not saying that right. Um, but it talks about Saint Columba encountering some locals burying a man by the river, the Loch Ness.
hmm
Uh, and these locals explained to him that the man was swimming in the river when he was attacked by a quote unquote water beast that mauled him and dragged him underwater despite their attempts to rescue him by boat.
That's crazy.
Uh, so, upon hearing this, this Columba fellow,
hmm
he sends one of his followers to swim across the river.
As one does.
Um, and then in this book, he talks about how the beast then approached the person like swimming across the river, I think.
hmm
And but Columba, being the holy saint that he is, he made the sign of the cross and said, "Go no further. Do not touch the man. Go back at once." And the creature stopped and he fled. So
What? Jesus. He just exercised the Loch Ness monster.
I'd like
yeah.
a witness. I'd like a witness to the story, please.
Apparently there were several witnesses, but getting to my next point, skeptics question the reliability, noting water beast stories were extremely common in medieval hagiographies.
Mhm.
New word for you guys, hagiographies. uh, Holy writing, that's what it translates to,
Mhm.
but it's biographies of saints or like religious figures.
Okay.
So, yeah, which, I would agree with that.
Okay.
They always say some crazy stuff. Uh, and then also they say that it might not even be related. But I mean, how many?
How many giant monsters in a lake do you know about?
Yeah,
Or a pond? Yeah. I mean, we know that alligators exist, right?
In the
And
sewer.
crocodiles.
Oh.
straight up dinosaurs.
Those are actual dinosaurs. Yeah. So what is the like it's not such a giant leap to think that another dinosaur survived, you know, through our lifetime. Who knows if it still is, but at one point in history it could have potentially crossed over with like human life, and a lot of these stories could be true as well as a lot of the sightings. But I think the most shocking and scary part to me is that Loch Ness was religious and believed and was commanded by the word of God.
Yeah.
There was a story also in somewhere in Texas. I remember sending you the video that it was somewhere by uh, your hometown about that they see something like Nessie. I forgot the name of the place too. I would forget the name of the place.
I don't know. I don't doubt it though.
Texas has everything. Black Eyed Kids
Mhm.
and
Well,
Loch Ness
I mean,
Monster.
even apparently Canada has their own Nessie as well.
Oh yeah, Champ.
They got a lot of.
Yeah,
They got
I
a
think his
lot
name's
of.
Champ or something like that.
Like the country's huge,
Yeah.
Canada, and the only really like populated areas are along the border. So there's a lot of like empty space and wild like wilderness, like and the U.S. too. Like
Yeah.
Chelsea and I have like gone on trips to like other states and stuff, and it's just
Yeah.
like nobody knows what's in these forests. Like they're just huge.
That was my thoughts when we went to Colorado. I was
Mhm.
just like,
Yeah, it's like all empty. Yeah.
yeah, it's
it's
all
just
empty.
all trees, mountains.
Yeah.
That's
It's
why I
like there's no
believe
way.
that overpopulation is just it's fake. They just want us.
I mean, I think.
I mean, I think the
Not to derail
thing
the
of
podcast.
overpopulation is just everyone crowding into like
Small
more and
areas.
more in the same space.
Yeah. It's not necessarily that we're running out of space. It's just that the space that people want is becoming overcrowded.
And that the earth can't support the amount of people that are on it.
The earth is getting heavy.
But
Mom Lure says they're skeptical of alligators.
skeptical of
Skeptical of
alligators.
Do they exist? Are birds real?
Oh, I did it the other day on my Snapchat. I could have sworn the fucking bird was fake. I anyway, that's a whole other thing. But still,
Sorry.
fucking bird was fake. For the longest time, it was making like different sounds of like different birds and shit. Then out of nowhere, it just stopped. After I recorded it too.
So a mockingbird, maybe.
But like late at night though.
Oh.
Mm.
It was like 5 in the morning. I don't sleep, so it's like.
Oh. Well, the bird was waking up then.
Yeah. There were also back
Back to
to
Loch
the,
Ness.
the original topic. There were also they created like their own investigation bureau
Mhm.
for this creature and got like $20,000 grant from the government. I don't know the proper government
Mhm.
term for Scotland, but
Yeah.
whoever's in charge there. There was this guy Edward Mountain who funded like an expedition in 1934. After reading about the monster, he put together a team of 20 men armed with binoculars and cameras and positioned them around the loch from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. for 5 weeks.
9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So a regular work day.
For 5 weeks. And they captured only, I guess, 21 photos. That seems a little
I
lacking.
mean, what I would have done is
but
do
it's the 34s, so.
yeah, but
Uh,
do it over 2 weeks and just make them work 24 hours.
Damn.
None of these photos were ever considered conclusive. And then there was a supervisor on the expedition, James Fraser. He remained by the loch filming, but the film is now lost. And apparently, whoever saw this, and well, I know who saw it, but zoologists and professors of natural history concluded the film showed a seal, possibly a gray seal.
Seals are nice.
I don't know, man.
Riveting.
A seal.
I think they're trying to cover it up.
I think.
I mean, Columbus confused mermaids with walruses.
Yeah. I think.
Are they not mermaids?
I
That's
think
true.
people were just
Who am I to say?
like
That's true.
kind of dumb back then.
Yes.
They just didn't have like the mental capacity to understand anything like beyond what they themselves know, you know.
Well, that's what most of the sightings of the Loch Ness monster kind of dumbed down to, is like stuff in the water, or like just wake from boats and
Yeah.
things like that.
But the interesting part to me, and it's always been this part, is that it's like in a self-contained like pond lake in Scotland, right? Like it
Yeah.
doesn't connect to the ocean. Like
That's
that 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 is what gives it more legitimacy
yes.
to me, because it's like this isn't like a whale that could come in from the ocean and like make its way to this pond, you know, and then you like confuse it, like, or like a seal or something. Like it's so like it's such a far reach to think that those things could make it there and then it also not be sighted again, you know.
Hmm.
It does connect to the ocean.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, something like that. There's like a string of like lakes or ponds. I don't know to properly locks, other locks that they
Okay.
kind of connect, and they do eventually lead to the ocean. Um, but yeah, I mean they connect to rivers, and I don't think a thing like that could go through a
Traverse.
river.
Yeah.
But
What if
the the more interesting end of my topic here is that they did a bunch of like sonar studies and stuff like that, and I'm not going to get into them, but they did find something down there that is at least greater than 10 feet. uh they don't know what it is or have pictures or evidence or anything, but they found on their like sonar devices something big down there,
which also
which
depending on the year,
could be debunked and yada yada, but
they say they have proof of something.
it's 755 feet deep in there, so I'm leaving my options open.
Yeah. Also, what if it's like I think it was Godzilla, like the most recent movies where they basically like
That would be
there's
awesome.
holes in the earth
Yes.
and they can like traverse through like different areas and stuff. Who's to say that's not at the bottom?
Inner Earth. Oh
I
man,
I like
this
that.
could happen.
And yes, Matthew, birds are basically dinosaurs.
That's true. Have you heard? Never mind. I'm just gonna get into.
Get into a whole thing about how birds are fake. Birds aren't real.
Have you heard the supposedly how T-Rex actually sounded? It's basically sounds like a bird.
I mean, I've heard that like chickens like are, you know, they're they're they have dinosaurs evolved into chickens and stuff. So it's like you go far back enough, I'm sure they'll.
I don't know. I think that's a popular thing that they say, but they only share like a very tiny percentage of the DNA or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they did get wiped out, so it's like we're just grasping at straws, I guess. Okay. Well, I guess it's my turn.
Hell yeah.
I mean, I can keep talking about the Loch Ness monster if you want.
No, you're fine.
Rambling.
But yeah. So for my story, I can't remember if it was you or Ruben that suggested this initially.
Mhm.
It is the Mothman, and the Mothman is like it's been around for a while.
Mhm.
Like there's been a lot of stories, and from what I gather, generally positive light. You know, tends to be a do-gooder, or at least like a guardian kind of thing.
Mhm.
And also in Fallout. So
And
I
Also,
was I was definitely interested. So I don't want to get too much into the story because I honestly don't really know a lot of the backstory of Mothman.
Mhm.
But we can definitely explore that. But for tonight, I just have a short story centered around Mothman.
Hell
So let's go ahead and just start that off. And really quickly, this is a story off of the Creepypasta Wiki. I cannot find an author, though, for this original one. So if any of you guys recognize it, please feel free to comment the original author. But I will be sure to link to this Creepypasta entry in the actual video description after this. So, without further ado, Michael was a 12-year-old boy who lived in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. He lived with a small family of three. Uh, sorry. He lived with a small family of three since his father passed away when he was 7. In his middle school, he was in the cryptozoology group. And in fact, he was the leader of that group. He and his 5 friends, Ashley, Ben, Zach, Kaylin, and Joshua, would meet in the science classroom and discuss different cryptids and urban legends. Every week, they would choose another cryptid to discuss and another member to research it. So, kind of like what we're doing. They quickly flew the list of cryptids easily. um, and before you knew it, they kind of made their way through everything they could dig up and find. Eventually, in December, they were at a loss of what to do next. They kind of ran out of what to look into until one member learned of another local legend, the Mothman. He told everything that he knew about him, and one by one, this cryptid grew on them. They argued over who should study it, when Michael, being the leader, announced that everybody would. He said this would be the final cryptid that this group researched. He read everything about the Mothman, and through reading the witness reports, found a possible hideout for it. Using all of the group's funds, they convinced the principal to give them a field trip. A field trip to the West Virginia Ordnance Works, an abandoned World War II TNT factory. The bus driver drove them 7 miles away from Point Pleasant and told them to come back if anything went wrong and to stay together, stronger in numbers.
Hell yeah.
The 6 kids jumped off the bus and slowly walked towards the first building of the Ordnance Works, which, what principal is going to agree to take these kids on a field trip to this abandoned place? But who am I to judge? Maybe, like I said, maybe there's nothing to do out there. Along the way, no, what'd you say?
It's West Virginia.
You're right. There's nothing to do in West Virginia besides saying West Virginia.
That's true. Their Lover's Lane, where all this takes place and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
was by like a mine and stuff. So there probably isn't anything to do out there. I mean, probably now, but back then.
Yeah, especially back then. But along the way, each kid muttered to each other about how the air smelled like smoke and how cold and freezing it was. But Michael was the most excited. He didn't care, and he knew that this was going to be amazing. He daydreamed about walking into the old-looking building and being startled by the Mothman sitting on a perch, and then discovering that Mothman was friendly and riding him far away in the breeze.
Me.
He smiled at the thought, but was interrupted when he saw he was at the door. And he nearly squelched with excitement as he opened the door and held it open for his friends to come through. They crept through the doorway, with their shoes making a dragging sound against the dirty vinyl floor, and came to a stop once they were all inside. Michael let go of the door and walked forward in silence. Everybody jumped when the door made a loud BAM! That seemed to echo for hours. The building was dirty inside, brick walls, broken machines, shattered windows, and only one source of light in this dimly lit building. They stood there in silence for a sec. Before Michael broke the silence by taking a step forward, he looked back at his friends. They followed his lead and came forward. They walked through the large main room, dragging their feet as they walked. Teenagers, am I right? Ashley glanced out the window and saw what looked like a raven or crow caw, then fly away. She sighed, letting out a cloud of warm air come out of her mouth, and looked ahead. Michael opened the door for them to go through. Atop a set of rusty stairs, though Joshua insisted that they would go through another door. You know, that's always the best move. Split up. Ashley insisted yet another door, so they split into three ways. Zach, fed up with the bickering, suggested that they should all just split up into small groups. Zach went with Josh, Ashley went with Ben, and Michael went with Kaylee, so three groups in total. They agreed to meet at the bus if anything went wrong. Michael grabbed the flashlight out of his backpack and turned it on. He nervously smiled at Kaylee and continued on through the door. He opened it and closed it as he entered, which, again, made an echoing slam. They crept down the hallway, which was pitch black aside from the flashlight. They felt uneasy as they couldn't see anything 4 feet away from them. "So how you holding up, Kaylee?" he asked, to lighten the mood a bit. "Fine, but something's off." "What do you mean?" "I mean," she was cut off by the sound of another door slamming. They quickly spun around and heard slow, scraping steps coming closer. They stared in horror and silence as the steps became louder and louder. Two dim red lights appeared down the hall. Kaylee wanted to ask what they were, but her throat seemed to swell shut. The lights grew brighter and bigger as the footsteps became louder. Michael felt a chill run down his spine, and he stepped backwards nervously. There was one last step, then they stopped. The two huge red lights seemed to glow. Michael's arm twitched as he slowly raised the flashlight to the red lights. He shone it to reveal a humanoid creature with glossy feathers. The feet were scaly and green with long black talons that seemed to dig into the ground. Its shoulders were about a foot taller than its head, and they were tipped with long black wings. And its head, it seemed to be pushed down into its chest, and it had two huge red eyes, as big as dinner plates with no pupils and no light, yet they still seemed to glow. Its mouth appeared to be either missing or covered by feathers. The two children stared at this creature, too scared to move. The creature stood there, motionless and expressionless. Michael attempted to whisper, "Run," to Kaylee, but all that came out was a loud squeak. Upon hearing this, the creature's eyes seemed to become even brighter, and it let out a horrible, otherworldly screeching noise, which reminded Michael of a mix of a scream from a horror movie and an ambulance's siren. It unfolded its wings and charged at them. Michael screamed at Kaylee to run, grabbed her hand, and tried to run, but Kaylee wouldn't budge. Her face was stuck in an expression of sheer terror, and she was staring at the creature in the eyes. Michael tugged and pulled on her arm, but she wouldn't budge. The creature was practically on top of them, so Michael sighed and let go. He ran down the hall, gasping for breath. He even heard a short scream. Lasted for only a second, and then nothing. The creature's eyes shone through the darkness and turned towards him. He screamed and sprinted down the hall. Thoughts raced through his head about what might have happened if he was caught and how he would escape. He looked around desperately for an exit or hiding place, but no avail. He glanced behind him and saw it gaining on him, and fast. He felt his stomach turn and sweat rolled down his face. He turned forward again and tried running faster. As he ran, he saw the door on the other side of the hallway. Michael gasped and ran ahead. He stopped quickly at it. Locked. He looked to his left and saw the eyes getting closer and closer. He screamed again and frantically turned the knob back and forth. Click! The door opened. He ran inside and left the door slightly ajar. He backed away behind a table in the room and prayed it wouldn't find him. He heard the scraping footsteps again, then heard them slow. He held his hand over his mouth so it couldn't hear him. He was so terrified that tears rolled down his face. Through the blur of his tears, he saw that there was a hand mirror in the room. So he held it up to see what was behind him so he didn't have to move. There it was, he yelped, and turned around to see its red eyes gazing down on him. He screamed, "No!" as the silent creature leapt over the table at him. Afterwards, when it was time to leave, Zach, Ben, Josh, and Ashley met outside in the snow and asked each other if they had seen Michael or Kaylee. Nobody had, so they sighed, puffed out clouds of warm air, and kicked their feet off the ground. They were, they were interrupted by a sudden ominous screech. They stopped sighing and turned to look at the building. The creature flew out of the shattered window, and as it flew, it twitched and writhed and fell and rose. It flew as though it were broken. It flew directly over the kids and flew over the kids' heads. Something fell off of it as it flew by, and it landed on Ashley's hand. It was a drop of blood. And that's it?
Well, that doesn't sound very friendly.
No.
Thought he was a guardian.
See, so from what I saw about the Mothman, generally good dude. And that's why I picked this story. Because it was just so contrarian to everything else that I had seen about him, you know. It painted him in the light of like how you would expect a scary, crazy monster in an abandoned building or mine to like behave, you know.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, how is that thing surviving? What's it feeding off of? What's it living off? Teenagers.
Have you seen any things like recent sightings of any Mothmans or anything?
No, I haven't.
I had heard one a while back. In 2007, people were seeing like sightings around. I'm always gonna bring it back to here in Texas. It was first in Houston, and then Corpus, and then some man named I just looked it up. It was Frank Rivera or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, here in San Antonio, that he saw what he believed was he called it Batman, but people are saying that it was like Mothman, pretty much. Another thing was I don't remember the year that it happened, but when that big nuclear thing happened,
In Japan?
Yeah, was it in Japan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people had seen some sightings of Mothman before it even happened.
Oh, wow.
And people see Mothman as like an omen of when bad shit is gonna happen. People see Mothman before anything happens.
Mm.
He
Yeah,
was,
That's what I've heard about
the
him.
first thing was when in Point Pleasant, the bridge collapsed and
The
46
Silver
people
Bridge?
died.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
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 So
yeah,
interesting.
crazy.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's like one of those things, and like back to what Charles and I were saying, it's like you can forget, especially when you live in like a big city, that a lot, a lot of the world is like undiscovered. And even if it has been discovered, it doesn't mean it'll always stay that way, you know. Like they'll find giant ancient civilizations in like the middle of the forest in like
Middle
the
of
Amazon
ocean.
or like in the ocean, yeah. So it's just like just because we know where things are now doesn't mean that we always will. And I think that's important to remember, especially when we talk about cryptids like this, that, you know, some of these things might exist, and maybe one day we'll know for sure one way or the other. But until then, we can't just write them off and say that they don't exist, you know, because we really don't know.
Yeah.
We really don't.
There was that I don't know the name of the animal, but I know they have it at the zoo because I've seen it before. It's like half zebra and half horse or something like that.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
I don't remember what it's called.
People at first considered it a cryptid. People thought it didn't exist, and then they found it. But you know, people are finding new species of animals each day. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it's possible.
Chupacabra.
I mean, they have that one bird at the zoo as well. It's the one with like a bony crest on its like head or something.
Oh,
I think it's in Fern Gully as well or something.
Mm.
One of those kids movies with like a Velociraptor looking bird
Yeah.
thing.
Mothman though.
you know, it was a little hard. So the reason we didn't have the podcast last week was because Chelsea and I were having a bit of a time trying to not only pick which cryptid we wanted to do, but then finding something on said cryptid. So
Mm-hmm.
like I've known that I wanted to do the Mothman since last week. It's just I felt like I was having trouble finding anything that like would fit the spooky for the podcast, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that we can definitely do this again, and hopefully it won't be so hard next time. Because I know in the early days of this podcast, we basically just like would occasionally uh, discuss our own personal experiences
Mm-hmm.
as well as like
Narrate.
short stories that we'd
Yeah.
found. So if you guys are open to that and want to hear more of that kind of stuff, both our personal stuff, or if you have a creepy cryptid that you want us to look into, feel free to comment that, and we will check that out next episode.
Since we're on cryptids, I could do the Bigfoot story again.
All right, let's do a Bigfoot, and
Um,
then we'll wrap up.
so when my mom was a kid, her and my uncle, and well, my family, they were like migrant workers, and they would go around across like the United States, and they would work in fields and things like that. And believe it was somewhere in like southern Michigan. They ended up settling with like a bunch of other workers, and they made like their own little town basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they were camping out, and there was this one shed where the kids they would go and they would all play, but like the older kids they would stick with the older kids, and the smaller kids would stick with the smaller kids.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my mom remembers playing. It was like something like I guess like duck duck goose because they were all sitting in a circle,
Mm-hmm.
and each one had to get up and they would run around or something. I'm not sure if it was duck duck goose, but it was something like that.
Something like it.
And one of the kids, she was a little girl. She My mom overhears her tell the other kid that she's like, quit touching me, and the little boy tells him, I'm not, like, it's not me. And then again, like later on, the little girl says, stop touching me. And she's like, again, I'm not touching you, stop. But it's all in Spanish that
Yeah.
they're arguing. um so he, she ends up getting like grabbed really hard, and she thinks it's the guy again. But they both happen to look down at the little girl's abdomen, and that's when they see two hands holding on to the little girl. So there's these two arms that are coming through, like I guess like underneath the shed,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like long arms, long hairy arms, and they're holding on to the little girl. So she tries to get away, and she's screaming. All the kids are freaking out, so they all kind of like run to one end of the shed, and they're just looking at the girl struggle
Jesus.
while the thing is just holding on to her and trying to pull her
Mm-hmm.
through the wall. She's screaming, and then eventually, like the kids, they end up going and trying to like they're basically having like a whole tug of war with this person or whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is. They eventually end up. One of the kids ends up grabbing something sharp. She doesn't remember what it is, but he grabs something sharp. They end up like poking the person's arm, and he lets her go. But when he lets her go, he does like this weird shake where he like looks like he's like frustrated but also hurt at the same
Yeah.
time. Tries to grab her one more time, misses, and just figures he's just like fuck it. Pulls his hand back underneath the shed. The rest of the kids they run out and they go and get the parents. Kind of like the old school movies, the parents they freak out and they're like, "All right, let's go get our guns." They go and get like whatever they could find. Behind a shed was like a cornfield.
Mm-hmm.
So when the parents rushed to the cornfield, that pretty much the cornfield was like split into like if something ran uh into the cornfield.
Yeah.
Like it was like something big though. They never found out what it was, but according to my grandpa, because I asked my grandpa about it, just found big tracks in the mud of feet, big feet.
big old feet.
Yeah, big old feet.
Where was this?
Somewhere in Michigan, I believe.
Mm.
He
And
gets
so-
around.
Yeah. So my mom believes that that's her Bigfoot story. She never saw it, but she saw the hands.
She saw the hands,
Yeah.
and if your grandfather, which people our grandparents' age, they're not gonna fuck around. If they tell us they saw like some big ass feet and like some cryptid type shit, there's like more reason to believe them than like people our age, because we're looking for it.
That's true.
We're looking for it, and we're like about that. At that point in time, those people were probably just like happening upon those kinds of things, like because I'm sure your mom and your grandpa probably didn't want to have a child get snatched on their watch, you know.
Yeah.
So like they're just like bystanders to that situation.
This is true.
That's crazy. All right.
Well,
Well,
I'm all out of stories for this one.
well, thank you guys for joining us on another episode of Let's Have a Seance. We will be back hopefully next week, or
I'm
well,
gonna be gone next week.
well, tentatively next week or probably the following week. Either way, we would like to continue doing this regularly for you guys. And like I said, if you guys have a cryptid or you want to hear more of our personal stories, or if there's a short story that you want us to read, feel free to comment that below. Let us know what you thought about the episode. And thank you guys for hanging out with us. I'm Fern signing off.
I'm Chelsea. See y'all later.
I'm Ruben.
Okay, bye, guys.